What is good, NIO family? It's Rey-Jay back with another video, and in this one I'm going to be talking about the one and only NIO stock, what you should be looking after for the future. I'm also going to break down why NIO dropped the way it did, because there are many factors that played a big role in this, from concerns involving China and the lockdowns, not to mention some apprehension about what's happening with earnings very soon. And also Tesla played a big role in NIO selling off because he is selling Tesla shares. So all these things played a big role. But I want to talk about why tomorrow is going to be an even bigger day than today, because we have NIO earnings coming out very, very soon. And then we also have CPI coming out. So these factors are going to have a very big effect on how the market moves. It will affect NIO too. So I want to break down why CPI is going to be big. I'm also going to talk about earnings and why tomorrow is going to be a massive day. Now, before I break anything down, before I get into any more details, I got to mention a couple of things. Firstly, I'm not a financial planner. Don't take any of this as financial advice whatsoever. And also, if you guys can, please smash the like button if you want to see more videos like this. It not only benefits me, it benefits the entire NIO community as a whole. And the last thing is, if you guys can, please check out the Webull link down below in the description. If you sign up for Webull, the link down below, and deposit any amount of money into the account, you're guaranteed up to 12 free stocks, each worth up to $2,000. The best part is any could be a free Tesla share, a free Apple share, or a mix of all of them. It's a limited time offer. The offer ends in just 1 week. Check it out before they run out. With that out of the way, let's get on with the video. Looking at NIO, this thing is very, very oversold, down 12% for the day. We're a little bit green in the after hours. And when a stock drops this hard, you tend to want to see a big bounce in the upward direction. Now, even though it is possible for NIO to see a big bounce and start pushing all the way to the upside and start approaching that 9.64 level, the problem is there are major catalysts in the market that could actually affect NIO. What's going to affect NIO would be the whole Elon Musk situation. Does Elon Musk sell more shares and cause more downside for the EV sector? Because Tesla does affect how NIO moves, believe it or not. And on top of that, we have CPI coming out. We also have NIO's earnings report. So all these things are going to be very important. So what's going on with earnings? All right, in earnings, it's starting tomorrow. I can't really say the time. It depends on where you are in the USA. It's going to be very early in the morning before the market opens tomorrow. All right, guys? And when this happens, investors are going to be listening to what William Lee Bin ends up saying, what the market is actually getting ready for. And they're going to have a lot of questions about what's happening in China right now. There's some very bad things happening in China, guys. We are seeing more of these lockdowns. It's really hurting these businesses. And many big banks and their analysts are actually adjusting their NIO targets because of that. And earnings are going to be affected by this. The real question is, will demand slow down to such a big degree that it actually ends up hurting NIO? And also, with more lockdowns, how is production going to end up coming out as time goes on? Is NIO going to meet their targets or not? This is going to be some very important information to come out. They're also going to ask more questions about production for their new models, about like ET5 and things like that, and what else they're planning on doing to actually offset some of these restrictions. The real question is, are they going to be lowering prices again? Who actually knows? I mean, I don't really want to comment too much on that. And how are their margins going to be affected? We're going to find out their earnings per share, their revenue. I do believe NIO is going to do well on revenue because they did actually beat lots of expectations when it comes to their amount of deliveries. But I'm not as confident on earnings per share, guys. I think their margins may be affected by the very hard situation that China is going through right now. Very similar to what happened in 2008 in the USA, starting from the housing sector. With that said, please be ready. I don't necessarily want to hype you guys up and say NIO will just explode instantly. It could have a bullish move because of this. However, CPI is coming out, and that can also have another big effect. So when we look at NIO, look at the price comparison between it. It was outperforming SPY a bit, but then it is coming down a bit. But if you look at how NIO compares to Tesla, all right, compare the two of them side by side. Look at this comparison. There are some strikingly similar price actions right over here between the way that they've been moving. And as of recent, we are actually seeing Tesla selling off a little bit worse than NIO, but it did play a role in why NIO is coming down because, like I said before, EVs do tend to be correlated. So why is Tesla selling off? Elon Musk is selling more shares, billions of dollars worth of shares of Tesla. This is actually causing the EV sectors to take a bit of a hit. Excuse me. So is it all because of Elon Musk? No. I mean, he's playing maybe somewhat of a role, but other global factors, geopolitical issues are also playing big roles too. Now, despite that, Deutsche Bank just 2 days ago has a buy rating on NIO. They're still very, very bullish. All right. From a seasonality standpoint, NIO is actually green only 51% of the time on Thursdays, so it tends to be 50-50. But what does concern me a little bit is the short interest. We saw another big spike on Friday. It is still relatively high compared to these levels back around like August and September when the market was performing a little bit better. So there is more shorting going on in this stock. Wall Street can be relentless when they try to attack these companies, and it does look like they are targeting NIO pretty hard right now. Now, despite what Wall Street is doing, we have to look at the data because data is going to be very important for tomorrow too. Tomorrow, CPI is coming out. All right. So we have like a double major catalyst day for NIO. We have earnings and CPI coming out on the same day. They're actually happening within a couple of hours from one another. CPI is also coming out before the market opens tomorrow. NIO is going to have earnings a couple of hours before. So overall, two major catalysts. CPI is anticipated to be 7.9% overall, with core at about 6.5%. They are expecting, the analysts, the experts, they're expecting CPI to come down. And they're basically pushing this narrative. It's also important to note that CPI could deliver a massive shock to markets. All right, the market's going to have a big shock, and this doesn't mean it has to come down. It could come in either direction. We could see the market just explode to the upside, which could help NIO, or the market could actually crash. All right, either are very possible. I do expect lots of volatility tomorrow. When it comes to the data, if you look at gas prices in the United States, you will notice that gas prices were very high in June. They started to come down pretty hard as we approached September. And compared to September, in the month of October, gas prices went up again. And we know that when gas prices go up, this tends to be correlated with a not so good CPI reading because energy makes up a big sector in CPI. So gas prices for October were about $3.94 per gallon on average in America. And that's actually higher than $3.82 on average for September in the USA per gallon. So, like I said, CPI went up for the month of October, not a good sign. Jerome Powell was also very hawkish. He's ready to see a Fed that's more aggressive, so it's important to note that. And when we look at the data so far, if you look at the overall CPI, this is the blue line right here for all items. This has been on a slight downtrend, but the problem is the only reason it was coming down is because of gas, because gas prices were coming down like I showed you guys earlier, and gas prices just went up. So in this sector, if everything was the same and only gas prices went up, the overall CPI would come up a little bit. But if these factors also kick in, if we're talking about other commodities out there, other prices like food and things like that, that could also change it. So when it comes to core CPI, right, the purple line right here is core CPI. This is CPI, inflation without food and energy. This has been on a big uptrend. You guys could see it. It's clearly getting worse and worse. If it's high again, it's not going to be good for the markets. There's no key indication out there that it truly peaked during this big move to the upside it's having. So it could be a little bit higher than expected. And if this is higher, if this continues to maintain these levels, the overall CPI could be higher because gas prices went up on top of that. Overall, guys, it's not looking good in my honest opinion. I think we're a little bit more likely to see some more higher CPI levels. The market's a little bit neutral. It's actually a little bit closer to the fearful side. This hasn't updated yet, but overall, the market is getting ready for some big news. When it comes to the midterm elections, the House is most likely going to be won. If it hasn't been won already by the time you're watching this, it's going to be won by the right. On the Senate side, it still is very close, so we don't truly know yet. So anyways, the last thing I want to talk about would be the data. If you look at the expectations for CPI, most people expect a 7.9% CPI rating. Now, the truth is, I don't really know what it's going to be, but considering gas prices, we're likely going to see it at around 8 to 8.1%, or even higher than that, in my opinion. But I'm saying about 8 to 8.1% is my target, which would be a little bit higher than expected, which is not good for the markets. I would anticipate lots of volatility because of this. Now, CPI itself is not everything. Another big factor is going to be core CPI. Once again, CPI without food and energy. The expectation is 6.5%. Anything from like 6 to 6.5% would be pretty good. But if we see it a little bit higher than expected, which I think is very possible, like 6.6%, if it matches the last reading from September, that's not going to be good for the markets. And the market could see, it doesn't have to be like a major, like complete crash and collapse, but it could see lots of volatility and a kind of significant drop, right? There's a big difference there. So what does this all mean for NIO? I believe earnings is going to affect the way we move. If NIO beats on earnings and does very, very well, there's going to be a lot of upwards pressure for this stock. And NIO is going to push to this 9.64 level. Then if we break that, there's 9.8, then $10. We could see NIO pump up. I don't see NIO jumping like 12% in one day to fill this gap, but I could see NIO try to push up. However, I don't truly know if NIO is going to get a big push up. It could see a reversal and maybe even turn red if CPI is horrible and the whole market collapses. Also, if Elon Musk, keeps on selling more of these Tesla shares and EVs are still seeing some downward pressure, it could cause NIO to see more volatility, maybe come down a little bit more, guys. So in my opinion, it's going to be heavily dependent on CPI. I think that's one of the biggest factors. Earnings is also a huge factor. So for NIO, I do believe NIO is going to do well for earnings, but it also depends not on the numbers, because we saw this in previous earnings in the USA. Just because a company beats on like revenue and EPS, it doesn't mean it's all in the clear, because guidance is going to be very important in a very future looking market. The market looks ahead. And if the market realizes that, look, for the future, NIO may not be doing as well because of what's happening in China, just hypothetically, the market is not going to like it, and we could still see a sell-off. Now, am I saying it's going to happen? No, I don't know. That's why you have to be very prepared. I do believe that NIO is going to do well, or at least pretty well on revenue and some metrics out there. So it could hold up pretty well thanks to that. It's also very oversold. So when it tends to be oversold like this, it tends to see a big reversal. Because we're down like 12% in a day. I mean, that's very significant. From an RSI perspective, NIO is currently at like 34. And if you look at this on a bigger time frame, it still is very oversold. In my opinion, what I wanted to mention is if the market allows it, NIO could hold up. If CPI is better than expected, NIO can make a big move and approach the $10 mark, right? If the data is good, if NIO does okay on earnings and guidance isn't as bad. But if NIO's earnings is just okay and then CPI is horrible, there's a good chance NIO is going to trade sideways and maybe come a little bit lower and retest $9 flat. Now we have a strong demand zone at $9. I'm hoping that that holds. If it doesn't hold, guys, be very, very cautious and watch this thing, okay? So tomorrow is a huge day. I'm not just trying to like clickbait you when I say that. It really is a massive day for NIO because earnings is big, not to mention CPI, that's huge. If you don't believe me when it comes to CPI being big, look at SPY right here. Let me show you how big CPI could be. If we go back, where is it? Right here. On SPY, when we had CPI, the last time we had it was on the 13th of October. When CPI came out, the market crashed. We saw a huge 3% swing. Then we had a like 7% move to the upside on SPY. Crazy, crazy candle. Look at this candle. It's so huge after CPI came out. This thing is powerful. It's a huge market moving event. For NIO, look at how NIO reacted to that news. NIO, on the other hand, had very interesting price action. NIO came down pretty hard on the day. NIO went from we went from 12.8 all the way down to the 11s. So we dropped like over $1. We had a big bounce and this thing turned green, closing at about 12.8, very close to where we opened at. So NIO could make a 10% move just based off CPI alone, guys. We saw that in the past. That's why it's going to be such a big day. Anyways, thank you all for listening. Please be ready. Like I mentioned to you guys, I'm not as optimistic about CPI. I think it's going to be a little bit harder than expected. So this could have a negative effect on NIO, but as long as earnings does relatively well and guidance isn't as bad, there's a good chance NIO could actually hold up and maybe push to the upside a bit. In fact, I believe that if CPI wasn't happening tomorrow, NIO would likely push up because it's very oversold to get a nice bounce, either retest $9 and bounce or just start pushing up. But because of CPI, it makes me a little bit more on the apprehensive side, and we could see this thing trade a little bit sideways because of that. So be ready, guys. CPI is going to be huge. Watch the news, watch the report that comes out. And also when it comes to earnings, look at the articles and look at the numbers, how earnings per share is, their revenue, the guidance, what the CEO and people say. Be ready, guys. Remain calm, cool, and collected, and I'll see you guys in the next one. NIO to the moon, because the long-term future is still incredibly bright. And peace out.